The Olmec culture's art has caused a lot of problems for archaeologists. That's because the styles of the Olmec Colossal Heads, their enormous altars, and their jade masks seem to have extremely significant differences that may reveal a deeper history than anyone ever knew. Events across thousands of years, cultures around the world, strange Werejaguar cryptids, and sculptures more realistic than today's collide for this impossible historical story. Ever wondered what a werewolf would look like if it weren't a wolf but a jaguar or a fox? Join remote viewer John Vivanco and me, investigative researcher Rob Counts, for a show that's out of this world.
And if you're listening to this metaphysical podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or anywhere else, that 5-star rating and review really helps us reach more people, and we truly appreciate it.
John, how you doing?
Hey, good. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I'm excited about this episode. The Olmecs are a very, very interesting subject. When I started looking into Mesoamerica, my intention was to kind of go straight into Mayan culture, but I kind of couldn't because there was this thing looming behind it all, which was this foundational civilization that they call the Olmecs. Olmecs. That word is a word that was given to them by our experts today. And the word actually translates to rubber people because the Olmecs had figured out how to take rubber from the rubber tree and mix it with another plant to create what we know today as rubber.
Okay.
Or, the organic material known as rubber, because a lot of it is synthetic today. And they used it for all kinds of things. Now, first of all, that alone, if you really think about that, we're talking about hunter-gatherers.
Right.
Figuring that out alone, already, I'm like, something's up with these people. You don't figure out how to make rubber. Like, that's incredible, actually. Like, what you could do with rubber and all of that, right? Not only that, but I was finding, and we'll get into this a little bit later, these exquisite, I use that word, jade masks that were totally baffled me, because the artistry on the masks themselves didn't seem to match, in my opinion, other Olmec type featured objects.
Right.
Okay. Now what Lindsay has up, and this is what we're probably going to talk about first, is the Olmec Colossal Head. This is one of them. I believe this is one of the smaller ones. I don't think this is the larger one. This one is, I think this one is about 6 tons. Now, a bunch of Olmec heads, these giant colossal Olmec heads, were excavated in between La Venta. I think it was like La Venta and another city. I can't remember the name of it, but it was all in this area, the lower the lower land there of the Gulf, where the city of Tabasco is, La Venta. Yeah. And each one of the heads shows a different features of a different person, which has led experts to believe that these must have represented different Olmec gods. I'm sorry, not gods, kings, rather. Different Olmec kings. Now, and you can see even the features on the helmet differ a lot. But what's stranger than that is that these stone colossal heads were chiseled from basalt, which is a very, very hard rock to work with. Okay. So the artistry level is already very high. And we have that these figures were chiseled from basalt. The nearest basalt quarry is 50 miles north in the mountainous areas over there. I mean, between where the Olmec's alleged civilization was and where the basalt stones were originally found, where they were mined, you're talking about a nearly impossible, uh, you know, area of land to travel over with 40 tons. Now, again, the heaviest is 40 tons. Now, experts believe that they even moved the stones before they chiseled them, which would have made the stone exponentially heavier.
Right. How old do
So
they estimate? What's their interpretation on age?
they think that the Olmecs were at their kind of height between 1400 BC and about 600-ish BC. Some people think that they may have gone back a little bit later to like 2500 BC or something like that. There are some people that think that.
Mhm.
But I have to remind you here, okay, yeah, so at least 900 BC, right? At least. I have to remind you, though, that these stone heads were buried underground. Now, any kind of carbon dating that you could do, I don't know how you would be sure that that's accurate, because you're taking the surface of the object and you're putting it through carbon dating, and all of that. There's so many questions that you'd have, in terms of an accurate date.
Yeah,
These could be
the
these are
dating,
stone and
right.
right.
The dating would be what how old that layer of earth was that it exists within, and any organic materials in there possibly. They can, I don't know. Yeah, that's pretty, yeah, probably pretty weak.
Pretty weak. Pretty weak. I mean, we're talking about maybe like a low percentage of accuracy,
And
at least in my opinion.
right. And if it is correct on the date, that would have been when the dang thing was buried.
Yeah. Yeah, and why was it buried? I mean, there's so many questions,
Right.
right? Like why and how, I mean, over time I understand things like, especially if there was a cataclysm, whether if the like let's say these were around before the cataclysm, right? Um, these things are going to get buried over time, just like life and the earth is going to grow around it and it's going to create more soil, and then
Right.
over time it's going, you're going to see more and more of these things. Now, some other strange things about these heads is the features on the head. People have had lots of controversial arguments over. Are these Africans? And does this show us proof that Africans came over here? But, the people that are there, like, no, 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 that's ridiculous. These are Polynesian, uh, like these can be attributed to the Polynesian people,
Right.
and that, like, hey, let's stay focused here because all the people around here are Polynesian. They're not African. But there's been like a lot of back and forth because the features are stronger, the noses are wider, the lips and things of that nature. Um, the thing that I'm asking, though, that I don't see other people asking is, where the heck did these people get the idea to carve colossal giant heads? I mean, really, like, think about the process that you'd need to go through to come to the conclusion that you should carve that thing.
Right.
That can't be a simple thing. Like, what did the earth look like at the time when the Olmecs were traveling around, right? And then it goes back to those altars I told you about a couple of episodes ago,
Right. Right.
where you've got these altars where there's very strong figures emerging from caves, right? And you're just thinking like, okay, so did these guys emerge from caves after the Younger Dryas? They came up on Earth and they started seeing massive megalithic sculptures or objects, and they started to create some of their own.
Right. Right.
Or, because these things are so massive, was this a race of giants that created massive stuff and these were relatively smaller? Because if that's a throne and someone was sitting on that thing and it's 6 feet high, and the people at the time were only getting about 5 feet 5 tall max, because they're running around in loincloths and whatever,
Right.
it seems like a little bit difficult for me to imagine that they're climbing up there and hanging out on them and it's a throne,
Right.
right? Now, the other thing too that's kind of strange is that those features on the Olmec Colossal Heads may or may not really represent or look a lot like the cave figures that are coming out of those caves. Why do the cave figure or the features on the cave figure look slightly different? These look to me more Maya or Mayan, especially the helmets. Like, why wouldn't their helmets be similar to the colossal heads, right?
Right.
Now, if that's not enough, all right, now we've got in my opinion, a highly advanced civilization that is able to move massive, heavy stones that are like anywhere from 20 to 40 tons from a quarry 50 miles away down to where their civilization is, where they're the best sculptors and crafters of their time, 1400 to 2500 BC, whatever it is, where they're telling us that no one could really do that. And they're using what to carve these heads?
Right.
They're using what to carve these altars? They do not have the tools. Even our modern man has to use like tungsten carbide tool like tips to actually carve stuff like this, right? It's just, this is a massive problem that no one has been able to really dig into and give it like a fair, like, there's no explanation for this. Even the same problem that we have in the Giza Plateau, where from the Aswan quarry they're trying to move down the rose quartz stones. All of the um, virtual kind of experiments that they've done, or real experiments they've done to try to move really heavy stone, have all failed. Our modern equipment doesn't move the stone. Like, the biggest truck that we have doesn't move the stones that are as big as they have in Egypt. And we have the same problem over here, nearly across the globe, and what seems like even earlier than the Egyptians.
Right.
This massive colossal heads and the massive colossal altars.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Well,
Okay.
that's the thing, is that engineers
Yeah.
that don't have a vested interest in how these things were moved and built look at it with absolute confusion. And they talk about
Yeah.
it. They can talk about it public because they won't get reamed for it, right? So some of these people do, and it's like they don't know. They say we can't move this stuff now. So
We can't move this stuff now, but they're giving all of these theories on how they did it, and they're like, wow, they must have just moved it down the river on really wide river rafts,
But
and they must have
how
been a
is it that
seafaring
a
culture.
civilization that is, if you follow the theory of evolution, as far as civilizations go, there's no way a civilization can even create that stuff if you follow what they are saying they were able to do and not able to do. So it's just
It's a
absurd.
massive problem, massive problem. Okay, so the artistry in these also, you could argue, are very different. This is a problem that I have too. The altars look very different to me than the colossal heads in terms of style and features. Um, Even the person, the anatomical sophistication of this is not as good necessarily as the Olmec heads. So were the Olmec heads much older? I mean, I'm not sure. But it gets even crazier. It gets even crazier. Now, we're just talking about art here and found relics, okay? The jade masks found in that is attributed to the Olmec culture is almost an even bigger problem. And the reason why is because the jade mask, this jade is harder to work than steel. These jade masks, they're actually harder to work than steel. Let that sink in for a minute, right? If the jade masks are harder to work than steel, and the sophistication of these is that great, who the heck carved these, and with what tools did they carve them? Now we're getting into, I mean, this is beyond iron. This is not they're not using iron. What you're just sanding it over a really long, painful period of time? I don't know,
I
right?
don't know.
Now, check this out. This bothered me even more. If you compare the Olmec masks to a period in Chinese civilization called the Hongshan period, which goes back to like 3000. 2000 to 3000 BC, 4700 to 2900 BC. We find jade masks that look almost identical to the Olmec masks that we're finding in uh, in Mesoamerica.
Right.
All right, so now we've got a even crazier narrative that's being like told to us. So were the Chinese seafaring and they were moving around, because the currents in the Pacific will definitely move you around, and you're going to hit Central America, and then you're going to come back up to China naturally. This is
Right.
what I found, right? If that's true, were some of these relics actually being shared? Was the artistry being shared at a time when this wasn't even possible? Which is a crazy, right? And it's not just one relic like the jade masks. There are multiple objects found in this area that resemble very closely the objects that are found in the Hongshan period of China, which is crazy to think about. Totally crazy to think about. This shows us a Earth that we're not even prepared to understand
Right.
completely.
Right.
Right.
Well, I mean, look, why do the seed bags show up across different reliefs and whatnot throughout different cultures? Why do these masks look the same? Why do the Tibetans and the Hopi have the same types of dances and look nearly exactly the same in their costumes when they do specific dances? And
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, like the whole thing was that culture was totally different. Like we were talking about before, culture was more expansive, connections were expansive. They weren't people who didn't know anything. They weren't like isolated in their little jungles with little like coconut boats and didn't know how to go out into the ocean. It was like literally they knew each other. They were sharing, they
You're
were
right.
trading. It's like that's what the explanation is. I mean, really, like what makes it so like incredible to us as to the similarities and we ponder over it is because we don't even consider, we're not allowed to consider a totally different civilization that was aware of each other and interacting with each other, right? Because they tell us that that could never have happened because we're so utterly convinced that we developed in one specific way. And that one specific way just falls out the window when you start to look at this stuff. It just goes away, it falls out the window. Even when you get into comparative mythology, come on, man. Like comparative mythology, like if you literally just dip your toe into comparative mythology, you'll just go, "Oh, all right. So something was totally different than what they're saying." And I'm guessing that a lot of comparative mythologists out there have their under the surface ideas about how this planet used to be that is totally different than how they tell us it is.
Well, and it's like all of the same story being told from a different perspective all around the globe.
Right.
A lot of times, right?
Same
It's
beings,
like,
just different names. Yeah.
well, and not to belittle any one particular culture. That's not the intention here. But it's like you can really start to get that sense when you're really looking into what is Hindu culture, in the Indian culture, or from India, and then you're looking at what's said about the flood everywhere on the planet, right? You're just looking at a culture that goes back further in time, but then as you get closer to that point, everyone has this same story.
Yeah.
It's just told in a different way from a different perspective, and then you've got the Bible telling it from a completely different perspective that is logging basically the history of the New and the Old Testament, right, from the perspective of that culture, and then going in and we're seeing this from all of these different places all around the world, the same thing. I mean, even in China, you've got the same stuff going on. And so there has to be, I mean, I think comparative mythology is a thing. I think
Yeah.
that people that try to discount that should really look into it more.
Right.
Are you liking this episode so far? We're not even halfway through. To watch the rest of this episode, click the link in the description to subscribe to the metaphysical.tv.
You'll get access to all of our exclusive video podcast episodes on ancient history, mysterious legends, strange space phenomena, paranormal events, unbelievable cryptids, and amazing experiences you'll have to see to believe.
Your support means we can keep doing these deep dives. It also means we can design more merch and make more awesome products like our metaphysical coffee, which you can get at the link in the description. Thanks so much for your support, and we hope you thought this episode was as out of this world as we did.